Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bear Down Ballers here on the Field of 68 Media Network. I'm Ryan Wall, joined once again for our second season together by Jordan Pollock, and we are back for another season of Arizona men's basketball. The season starts next Monday against Canisius. That's their opening game. We're going to get into how we think they're going to do this year, predictions, surprises, breakout players, much, much more. But first, Jordan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so good. This is my favorite time of the year. We've got everything slowly coming together. Yesterday, we had major football, basketball, hockey, baseball. Everything's going on. The season's changing. It's in Arizona, it's getting a little hotter or a little less hot. So everywhere else is getting a little colder. Put on some hoodies, get in the gym, watch some basketball. I'm so excited to be here, man. I'm so excited to talk about our Wildcats.
Yeah, there's nothing better than basketball, and there's nothing better to me than college basketball. As we get into the winter months, it continues to heat up, continues to be the best thing on television. But Jordan, before we talk about the season ahead, let's kind of catch up where we left off from last season and who are some of the new faces in Arizona, who are some of the guys that left. Let's get right into it. Four guys left that were starters from a season ago. Those guys that we know: Umar Ballo transferred to Indiana, Kylan Boswell transferred to Illinois, Pella Larson was drafted in the NBA draft to the Miami Heat. Keyshawn Johnson joined them as an undrafted free agent in Miami. We had Paulus Morauskas and Philip Bervichian both transferred. Morauskas went to St. Mary's. Bervichian went to New Mexico. Those are the guys that are out. Six guys out, four starters out, and then five new guys in. Toby Awoka from Tennessee, Anthony Delorzo from Campbell, Trey Townsend from Oakland, the sharpshooter, Carter Bryant, one of the best five-star recruits to come to Tucson in a couple years, and Emmanuel Stephen, who was a four-star. Who sticks out to you from that group? And let's start with the guys that left. Like I said, four starters out and a lot of new faces. How do you think that'll affect this year's team?
Yeah, I think the two ones that stick out for me the most are the guys that joined together in Miami and Pela and Keyshawn Johnson, and that was just kind of what they could offer on both ends of the floor and how they were able to defend at such a high level. Like I love those two guys for the NBA too, because Pela can guard the one, the two, the three. He could probably get away with guarding some fours too, honestly. I have a hard time seeing him guard some of this great centers that are in the NBA right now. But Keyshot is a guy that can guard one through five, I believe, and just the athleticism and their grittiness of just being able to defend well, but also create some offense too. And we know the Miami Heat are huge on getting basically just 3 and D guys that are just going to show up to the gym and shoot threes and then defend at a high level. And I think that's exactly what Pele is going to do. I'm excited to see what he can do in his rookie season. And then Johnson as well as he if he possibly gets an opportunity.
Yeah.
So those are I think the biggest losses that they have, just what they could do on both ends and the flexibility it kind of gave Tommy last year with the roster.
Yeah, we were both high on those guys all of last year in particular, and even Pella, the couple years he was at Arizona, he was excellent. We always labeled him as that ultimate glue guy, and he was that to a T. He affected the game in so many different ways: three-pointers, deflections, steals, driving to the basket. Even his passing game improved late in his career at Arizona. And then Keyshawn Johnson, that guy is just the type of player that you want with you in a big game. He makes all the little plays, kind of like Pella does, but he's just such a hard worker, and his energy that he plays with, to me, is really going to be hard to replace. And the first thing you mentioned about those two was defense. I 100% agree. I think the biggest thing that this team's going to need to replace, not so much offense even, but more on the defensive side of the ball. Because when you lose two guys like that are dominant, and then Umar Ballo as a whole, I know Umar Ballo did have his struggles. I want to get into him late in his Arizona career. But let's make no mistake about it. He was one of the best rebounding bigs, one of the best defensive bigs in the country last year, and he made an impact every year he was at Arizona. That guy is irreplaceable, and I'll touch on Mo Crevis and him trying to fill Ballo's shoes. I really think that those are the three biggest things. Ballo and Larson and Johnson, the two guys that went to the NBA, those are just hard to replace. And kind of moving on, do you feel that Arizona did a well enough job replacing those guys? Because they didn't just add a lot of freshmen like they maybe have in the past. They added a lot of depth and veterans, guys from the portal. So what do you think about those replacements?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't want to undersell Umar or Boswell in any way, shape, or form. They were great at times in the program. Some pretty high highs both of those guys had, but there was some low lows. You said Umar Ballo, he had stretches where he just couldn't hit a free throw. And if he wasn't getting isolation paint touches, he just kind of wouldn't do anything offensively besides hit the boards. Though that will be missed. That will be missed. And then Boswell is just he just was not consistent really in any way. Mostly last year starting on offense or defense. And I think that is a big thing that really explodes with the loss of Pela and Johnson is they were just so consistent every single day. Like either they would hit shots or they would just work so hard and grit their way in every single possession to where if their offense dropped, it didn't matter because they're still making those game-winning plays. And I think the biggest thing and the difference between last year's roster and some of the new additions is I feel like this team is just a lot more balanced, and I think this team's more athletic, and they're going to be. I think they're just going to be able to match up a lot better into this new league that they're going into. And I think Umar Ballo was huge for this team last year. This year, I have a really hard time seeing how Ballo would have fit with the roster and especially in the Big 12. Like they're known for their physicality, guard play, and Houston and Baylor, they run all these crazy zone sets and their guards are super physical. They try to get their hands on the balls at all times and they try to force you to the middle and that was the thing that Ballo struggled with. If he's not one on one, he kind of struggled offensively in the paint. And so I think the roster and with these new acquisitions, I think it gives Tommy Lloyd a lot more tools in his tool chest, especially through how hard the conference play is going to be.
Yeah, and I think the versatility that this team can play with and how flexible this roster is, like you touched on, is what separates this roster from last year's. And I think this has a potential to be one of the best rosters that Tommy's had during his 4 years at Arizona so far because they can play so many different styles. They can play with the 7 footer, they can play small, but the first guy that I think has a chance to match what Keyshawn Johnson brought to this team is the first veteran that I mentioned is Toby Awoka. That guy from Tennessee, and we saw it a little bit in the exhibition games throughout the past week or two. He brings that energy. He brings that effort. He hustles every play. He really is a guy that is a similar style to Keyshawn Johnson, and I really think that, especially when Tommy Lloyd brought all these pieces together in the offseason, I thought he had a home run. I gave him, in my book, I think Tommy Lloyd, if I'm grading it, I give him an A this offseason with these moves that he made because he brought in two high level recruits. And it's not just young guys like the old version of Arizona. Like I said, brought in some
Mhm.
veterans and didn't just bring in, older players. He brought in some of the best guys in the portal. I mean, Trey Townsend, we know him, the whole country knows him at this point after last year when he went off
Yeah.
against NC State in the second round, but went off had a 17-point double double against Kentucky, leading to that upset when Oakland beat them. And then he had 30 points, like I said, against NC State. He really does it all. I really think, and we saw it during the exhibition games, Trey Townsend is that alpha. He is that leader on the court, and he has a potential to be the best player on this team. I know Caleb Love is returning. He was the last season he was the best scorer and kind of was that older and more mature player. We know his highs are very high, and we know Caleb Love's lows are low. But I really think Trey Townsend is going to be the most consistent player on this team. He's a really good three-point shooter, elite rebounder for his size, and scores the ball at such a high level. I think he was the number one addition to this roster in the offseason. What do you think Trey brings to this team?
Yeah, I agree. I think the biggest thing we've even seen in the first two exhibition games is just how lethal he is from downtown. And that was a big component last year that was just super inconsistent on a nightly basis outside of Pela and outside of Caleb Love. But even at times, Caleb Love kind of struggled at times from the 3-point line. And so that's one thing that I think with him and Anthony Del Orso is I think they have some guys that can consistently call on and get in the game to get open threes and hit them. And that's going to be huge in the Big 12 with some of the zones that some of these teams run, and guys like that are going to get open looks. And you're at Arizona, they brought you in to hit these shots
Yep.
when you're called upon. And so I completely agree with that. I think one thing that's interesting about specifically Awaka is you kind of talk about like the energy that he's going to bring that kind of Keyshot had last year. And I agree with that. He is super versatile, but I think the role, I think it can kind of be a combined between kind of what Umar did last year, just because he's a whole inch taller and he's got 25 pounds on Keyshawn Johnson. And I think that's going to help tremendously with the physicality of the Big 12. And they're a league that's not really known for really the centers. Like outside of Hunter Dickinson, I don't even know if I could really name many other centers. I guess Iowa State has a really skilled center from Wisconsin that's really good, but they're not really known for like having dominant centers. And so I think that's one thing that having a center that can be versatile can be very huge for this team. And like you said, like he'll probably mostly be power forward, but I do see them running him at the five a lot this season.
Yeah, he played the five in the expedition games.
Mhm.
While I'll talk about in a little bit, um, Arizona was missing their starting center with Mo Krivas, but the besides Townsend's elite play in the last two games during this preseason for say, the second guy that stood out to me the most was KJ Lewis. We're expecting a big season from KJ Lewis. The team is, the fans, everybody is. He had such he was so good in small moments last year, but I think this year is when he takes his game to another level, is when he gains confidence on offense to not just make the little plays, but get a bucket for himself, to get others involved and operate in as the point sometimes, which he's shown that he can do very well. And he did some of that in the previous this two games in the last week, and I was just really impressed. I think he's one of the best athletes in college basketball. I think he's one of the best guards and one of the most slept on guards in college basketball because he didn't fill up the stat sheet to the extent of a Caleb Love did last year. But as a younger player, a breakout guy, he's as good as you're going to get for any team in the country. I really think this team success is going to rely a lot on what level KJ Lewis could get to this year. Is he going to take a little step up, or is he just going to explode and take it to the complete next level? That it's too soon to tell, but I really like him this year. I really think that it was smart to to kind of part ways with a Boswell to get guys like KJ Lewis more involved. What do you think about KJ this year?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think also it'd be really easy to compare him and Boswell from their freshman year to what we're expecting from their sophomore year. But I do think KJ Lewis actually has quite a bit bigger sample size of kind of what we saw from his freshman year. And I think with that, I think the expectations can be super high, like you said, of him exploding. And I don't necessarily think his floor is going to be super low. Like the thing we saw last year and we know about him, he's athletic. He can athlete his way into multiple buckets, into steals, into dunks, and he's going to do that. And whether now does he take the step where he's going to be able to create a shot? Is his open shots going to start falling? And that's a thing that can make this team just soar to new heights. And just the makeup of this roster of how many combo guards that's on it, I think is huge going into the Big 12. Like you got guys that can put it on the floor and guys that can shoot when they're open. Jaden Brownlee, Caleb Love, KJ Lewis, Trey Townsend, Anthony Del Orso. These are all guys that can shoot the three ball and get take it to the
And
hole. And I think that's
And Carter Bryant.
yeah, Carter Bryant too, and just his crazy size and his length and his athleticism. And that's a newcomer that I'm really excited to see, especially his size, 6'8", 225. That's insane for
As a
an
fresh,
18-year-old. Yeah,
unbelievable.
literally.
Yeah,
So I'm
I was
excited.
I was blown away by him as well during the exhibition games. I was that guy on the fast break is going to be a joy to watch.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see how this kind of roster kind of carves itself out and how guys kind of carve their roles because Carter Bryant is a guy that it's I think it could be to a case of like where do you put him in minutes wise, but we have to get him on the court just with his athleticism and maybe they interchange him and KJ, and maybe that's kind of a thing they go to of just combo guards that just super athletic, and they always want one of those guys in the game, or maybe they run them both out. I don't know. It's crazy the toolbox that Tommy Lloyd has this year.
Yeah, I want to see those guys play a little bit together this year.
Yeah.
And as we see with Arizona in the past couple of years, Tommy has been reluctant a little bit to play some of these young guys early and often in the season. But I really think Carter Bryant's a top 25 guy in the country. He's really as elite as it gets for a freshman coming into college basketball. He's projected as a first round pick, as I've seen it by many across the board for next year's NBA draft. He's a guy that is going to play this season without a doubt in my mind. He has to get in there. He's that talented. He does so many things well. And like I said, his athleticism, he's one of the best athletes on this team already as a freshman. So, yeah, I think we're going to see him. I think maybe he'll slowly progress his way into the rotation. I'm not expecting, 20 minutes, 15 minutes out of the gate, but I would really be shocked if he doesn't by the time we get to March, and I'd be shocked if he's not a big part of this rotation. But Jordan, we've talked a lot about a lot of good things so far, but there's one glaring issue that I've found on this team, and I'll see if you agree with me or disagree with me. I'd love to hear it. But to me, it's point guard play. We know that's one of the biggest areas that you need in order to win a championship in college basketball. In order to even go far in college basketball in the tournament, you need a good point guard. And I really don't think Arizona has a point guard on this starting roster. We have Conrad Martinez, who's to me the most true point guard on this team. He's going to come off the bench, obviously. But to me, Arizona really has a bunch of combo guards in this projected starting lineup. Jaden Bradley. I love Jaden Bradley. Had a great postseason last year. And we have Caleb Love, who he's handled the ball here and there. He's not a full-time point guard. And then we have KJ Lewis. Like I said, he's experimented here and there, but he's not a full-time guard. maybe Tommy goes with that kind of point guard by committee, kind of like a running back by committee here, because to
Yeah.
me, this team doesn't. Jaden Bradley is not an elite point guard, and I don't think his best position is point guard. I said that last year on this show about Jaden Bradley. I think he excels off the ball and attacking the rim more than he does facilitating. What do you think about that take?
Yeah, I don't know if I fully agree. I think especially later in the season when especially in the tournament, like with Bradley's bigger games, I felt like a majority of the time he was on the court. And the idea of like prototypical point guard, like I understand where you're coming from, but I still think like him having the ball in his hands, he just made stuff happen. And I have a hard time just seeing it where he was in the big moments last year of him not continuing that. And I think he's a guy where I think his floor is probably quite a bit higher than a year ago when we saw with Boswell. Of Boswell was just hit or miss. There are some games you wouldn't know that he played at all if you didn't look at the stat sheet and see all of his missed
100%.
three pointers, you know, or he'd be crazy. It would be nothing or something, and that was just so hard with the team consistently because every single game we felt like, well, these guys are just like looking around trying to figure out who's going to take the shot, and that instills no confidence in your teammates or in yourself. And I feel like Bradley, like no matter like he could explode for a few games, but I don't think he's going to show up with just zeros on box scores. I feel like he's athletic enough and he has enough anticipation to get steals and to put the ball where it needs to be at times.
Yeah, I
And
agree with that.
I think the way they play too is they're just so up and down that I don't think they're going to be looking around, oh, where's the point guard? Like somebody gets a rebound and especially how many athletes like they're gonna want to push the ball. It's not gonna matter who needs the ball, you
No,
know?
yeah, yeah.
And so I
No, no, you go.
and and so that's what one thing I would say about that. But when it gets down to March and the amount of possessions decrease, defense is set up, that's a little different. I'm sure that's probably a lot more of what you're kind of looking for. But I think just the way the offense moves, I don't see that as being a huge glaring issue, especially with every and these guys just seem so much more confident to me. I think that's a huge thing that can change the team too. Like especially on the offensive side of the ball. Like last year, like there were guys that could score all over all everywhere on the court. But it was the confidence that lacked of like, okay, like this guy needs to take the shot. Okay, nobody's doing much, so I'm gonna take the shot to where I think these guys have that confidence. Like
Mhm.
I just don't see a lot of the same things happening as last year, and I don't see a lack of point guard productivity being an issue this year, personally.
Yeah, and that one point you said I do agree on is that this team, I don't think we're gonna. I think we have more guys that are willing to take shots with a Trey Townsend in there. Well, obviously returning Caleb Love with Anthony Delorzo, who isn't gonna start, but is gonna play a major role. But just when I'm taking a step back and every year I love to buy the hype on all these young players and new additions, but when I take a step back and look at the facts, and that Jaden Bradley is entering his third year. This hopefully can be his breakout year, just like KJ Lewis in his second. But the reality
Yep.
is that Jaden Bradley only averaged 7 points, 2 assists. I know it was in a smaller role, but the Arizona is really betting on two young guys in Bradley and Lewis in that backcourt to really break through this year because they both played limited roles last year, showed flashes as we're saying, but we haven't seen them in a full-time role. So hopefully it goes good. But I think the thing that is better this year is that Arizona isn't as they're not going to have to rely as much to me on their starters as in years past. When you have an Anthony
Definitely.
Delorzo, who that guy's going to be rock solid every night to me. Toby Awoka,
Hmm.
obviously
Hmm.
he might start on the first game because because Arizona's going to be without Mo Krivas, but he's not going to be a regular starter, so he'll be off the bench. Carter Bryant, so this team does have some guys to come off the bench, so I think that's going to help. But if I did, I'm just trying to nitpick here a little bit, and if I did have
Definitely.
to, it would be the young guard play when other teams, especially in the Big 12, are really, really experienced. But I do think that it helps having, obviously, the veteran in Love here. But like I mentioned a couple times, let's get into it. Mo Krivas, the starting center. Can he step
Mhm.
in and fill Umar Balo's shoes? That's still to be seen. We don't know that yet, but he's still questionable for the home opener next Monday night against Kinesis with an ankle injury. Heard it earlier in camp leading up to this regular season. And to me, without Mo Krivas, that's when it takes a hit a lot because Mo Krivas is another guy that's penciled into that starting lineup when he's healthy. That for a guy to take that next step, he's another guy like KJ Lewis showed flashes. He's a 7-footer, so that's a different style to playing Owoka. But I really hope that he comes back soon because and just to build continuity within the team. But what do you think about that? About Krivas still working his way back from injury? Are you concerned about that? And what do you think about him in that starting lineup?
Yeah, I thought Krivas was had a great year last year. I didn't really I kind of doubt he even expected to play, especially with Vesar and how many minutes he got his freshman year, and I kind of expected him to take a step. And so with his injury concerns, I think that's a thing that I'm a little concerned about, especially now that both of those guys have past injuries or injuries now. And so I think that's a thing to take a look at. And I think it's also especially a little more difficult that those are your only guys that are over 6'8" that are really on the roster and have really any experience in the program. Um,
Hmm.
and so I'm a little skeptical about that. I hope they can get to full health. Um,
Yeah,
but
I do
I,
too.
I I love Krivas. I think Krivas is a I think all of our bigs are very unique and they do different things. And I think that's a thing that is great for the versatility of this team. Um, him and Vesar being 7-footers, I think that's huge for rim protection. As we had Umar Bala the last few years, and that was just huge for our interior defense. And so having guys like that, but offensively they're a little different. Vesar, I think, is a little more prone of being he can work in the paint, but he's also comfortable outside of the paint. To where Krivas, I feel most comfortable with Krivas down on the low post. And then Awaka, I think, can kind of he's comfortable with the ball everywhere, but he's definitely more of a low post kind of scorer and kind of what he was at Tennessee. But I think the center depth is a little concerning with the injuries, and so I think that's something to kind of keep an eye on going forward, especially with
Yeah.
how gritty Big 12 play can be, and teams might try to attack that if that is a concern going forward.
Yeah, I out of all the guys that the of the younger players that are taking that next step forward, the KJ Lewis, Jaden Bradley, they're getting bigger roles. I was the most concerned with Mo Krivas because to me, that's the biggest drop off out of all this stuff we're talking about is can they replace Larson and Johnson and Boswell? The biggest drop off, I said it a little bit ago, being Balo. It's not almost just losing Balo. I just I'm not we see it different ways. I think maybe it's gonna. I think in maybe another year or two, I think Mo Krivas could be a talented player for this team. I'm not sold on him this year. I mean, last year he averaged 5 points, four rebounds, about 12 minutes per night. That's just not gonna cut it when Balo was a legit bona fide. One of the things you could count on the last 2 years for this Arizona team was Umar Balo getting a double double every night, blocking a couple
Mm.
shots, and that's the biggest drop off because as though we both love Tobe Awoka. Awoka also is a guy who didn't play a lot in his first 2 years at Tennessee in a limited role. So
Mhm.
I really think that position as a whole is their weakest part. I mentioned point guard play being a worry for me, but really it's the center position is the biggest issue on this team. And I think it really could be the downfall for this team. If one of these guys can't take that step forward, we've seen Visar and we've seen Krivas be a little timid down low. They can't bang in the paint like Balo can. And I don't
Yeah.
if they won't be as physical this year, I really think they can struggle a lot in that area. You get what I'm saying there?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think especially with that, I think going forward and when it gets to January, February, I think how gritty conference play is going to be, and especially if that is a concern going forward, I think that could be a pretty big downfall of this team, especially with the teams that are they're competing with at the top, with Baylor, with Kansas, with Houston. Those coaches have, well, I know Houston with Sampson, he's only been in the Big 12 a year, but that year I think is going to be huge of them being able to game plan week in and week out to where Arizona just over the last few years of the Tommy Lloyd era in the Pac-12, like their game plan isn't very big because they're not playing against top 10 teams every other week and every other day. And so I think the end of that and the lack of depth in that area could, I think, hurt this team going forward when it gets into conference play.
Yeah, 100%. I want to get more into the schedule for the future of this season, get into our predictions, how Arizona is going to fare in their first season in the Big 12 when we'll be back in just a minute. All right, Jordan, we're back. Let's get into predictions for this season. Do we think Arizona could maybe make an Elite Eight? Something they haven't did in quite some time. Even make it further than that. How are they do in the Big 12 this season? Let's break it all down. Starting it off, like I said, they have two easy games this season. I want to go through the first couple games of this season and see when starts to get a little harder and how we think they'll fare. They, like I said, they play Kinesis on the 4th on a Monday, on that Saturday, next Saturday, Old Dominion. That game's at 4 p.m. on the East Coast. Kinesis at 10 p.m. on the East Coast. And then on Friday, November 15th, they start their first out of conference game, their hardest game of the season up until that point against one of your favorite teams, the Wisconsin Badgers. Let's start it off there. How do you think they'll fare in that first road game after having a couple easy ones to start it off?
I think it could be competitive. And I think there's going to be a lot of emotion around that game. You probably don't know this, but the two Final Four teams from 2014 and 2015 from Wisconsin will be in the Kohl Center for that game, as well as Bo Ryan. He's getting a banner hung up in the Kohl Center for his great career that he had at Wisconsin. So I think there'll be a lot of emotion. I think Wisconsin will play up. Wisconsin's definitely a lot different than they were last year. But I do see Arizona leaving the Kohl Center with a win on that game. There's just a lot of questions. Wisconsin, I think, kind of navigated their roster turnover, I think, pretty similarly to Arizona. They got a lot of athletic guys and a lot of athletic transfers. They had a transfer from Missouri that they've been really high on so far at the start of camp, and they think he's going to be really big. But they do return some good players. But I think just the star power of Arizona is definitely gonna I think punch them in the face at the end of that game. So I think Arizona goes there with a win.
Yeah, we'll get into these games more in depth as they come up, as we have
Mhm.
done in the past. But also, just in this game, I really think it's important, and it's something Arizona hasn't done in quite some time, is go not just play a good team, play a good out of conference team on the
Mhm.
road, not in a neutral site, early on in the season, in the third game of the season. I really like that scheduling tactic because, like I've always thought this in all sports, it's great to have at the end of the season to have an elite record and only a couple losses, like you previously mentioned about Arizona in the Pac-12. But the end of the day is when you get to the tournament and you haven't really been tested a ton, it ends up to hurt you in the long run. So I love that Arizona has a tough schedule, has to me a top three hardest non-conference schedule in college basketball this year. I think it's that good. After Wisconsin, Jordan, they head home, but not to just play anyone, play the number 7 team ranked in the country and arguably the most talked about player in the country, freshman Cooper Flag, the superstar to be, will be in Tucson on November 22nd. That game's a night game on ESPN2. That should be unbelievable. Arizona Duke last year was unbelievable when it was at Duke. And this year in Arizona, the fans should be crazy for that one. I'm looking so forward to that one. I can't wait. What do you think about that matchup and overall about them even making that matchup for the last 2 seasons early on in the year?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think it's just shows how fun this sport can be when everybody kind of puts their hands in and say, "Hey, let's play good, historically good and great in good programs with good coaches that always bring in good talent, and also for the kids to be able to experience different venues too, and for the fans I think it's huge too. Like one of my old roommates, he went to the Duke game last year, and he was just like, this it's a completely different level, going from what you're used to going to another historically great basketball program, and seeing how their fans interact with you, their venue, and just the game day atmosphere. And I think it's really cool. I think it'll be interesting to see going forward, being in the Pac-12, or not in the Pac-12, but in the Big 12, because I know that was a huge knock on a lot of the Big 12 teams last year, was they purposefully did not schedule really any quad 1 or 2 wins. I know Iowa State was at the top of the list getting a lot of flack for that, but they're playing such a great conference at the end of the day. Like it's not really going to matter going forward with their seeding placement because they already play so many good teams in the conference. But I love it. I love it. It shows that Tommy's not afraid to get this team into hard environments against great teams, and I think it'll do nothing but I think prepare them for the future. This game specifically, I think this will be Arizona's first loss of the season, and I think it'll probably be one of Tommy Lloyd's like earliest losses in his Arizona career. I don't know. Has he ever lost a November game?
No,
Now
no,
that I'm
no,
thinking
not
about
not
it,
that
I
I
don't know if he
remember in the
has.
first 3 years. But that matchup will be a big one, not just because two, like you said,
Mhm.
historically great programs, but it's number 7 Duke right now in the current rankings. Arizona's ranked number 10 to start the year. Really good ranking for them. But after Duke, it doesn't stop there, Jordan, with at a conference, great competition. They head to one of my favorite midseason tournaments of the year. They head to the Bahamas for the Battle of Atlantis. They started off with Davidson, but that tournament features a lot of great teams, 8 teams and 3 teams ranked inside the top 20 in the AP poll. As I said, Arizona's 10, but Gonzaga's in it. They're number 6. And also number 17, Indiana. The Hoosiers are in that bracket as well. So I love when Arizona, especially, but I love when any teams put themselves in these elite mid-season Thanksgiving week tournaments because it really puts them on a big stage early in the season. And as we see in the end of the year, even if you lose early in one of these tournaments, it's still good experience and it doesn't hurt you a ton in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. It's huge, especially for your donors to be able to take a Thanksgiving vacation and to go someplace new like the Bahamas. I was trying to get tickets to go, and I don't think they're anywhere short of 2 grand for the package to
Insane.
even go without even including plane tickets. So it's
Insane.
something super awesome for even the players to experience, and huge for fans that can make that trip. So. And I agree with you. That's my favorite one. And the games are like played in a hotel in like one of the grand ballrooms. It's
It's
it's just
great.
really cool, and I
Great.
love that atmosphere for the Battle of Atlantis.
Yeah, and we'll, like I said, when we get closer to Feast Week, we'll get into that tournament, have a full breakdown of that bracket. but Arizona, it's good they started off with an easier matchup for say against Davidson before they hopefully I want to see them play Gonzaga early, play Indiana hopefully in that to gain experience. But throughout the season, Arizona is in the Big 12 as we know now, and their schedule, we've hinted at it, we've said it, is a lot harder because Arizona is not the only team in the Big 12 ranked in the top 25. You know, there's so many other teams in the Big 12 that's ranked in the top 25. You got Iowa State, you got Houston, you got Baylor, you have Kansas, you have Cincinnati. There's so many teams that are good. This conference is so deep, Jordan, that when I saw this for the first time, I was shocked out of my mind. Arizona has the fifth best odds to win the Big 12 at plus 800 as I see it. And overall, Arizona to win the national championship, Arizona right now has the seventh best odds to win the entire thing. What do you think about with that those lines?
Personally, I think they're pretty accurate and pretty indicative of just Arizona kind of coming into a new conference that's full of nothing but bullies that are just going to bully each other night in and night out. And I think especially look at last year about how loaded Kansas was, and they didn't finish even in the top three in the conference. I think they were like sixth or seventh. And I think that's just indicative of the conference and even from top to bottom. Like I think it was Houston's first conference game last year. They went to UCF and UCF upset them. And that was a crazy day for college basketball. I think that was the day like three or four like top 10 teams
Yeah.
lost. And I think it's pretty accurate. I actually have Arizona finishing at fourth right now in the Big 12 at the end of the season. And I think that's pretty indicative too of kind of where some of the winning percentages of teams went last year. I think they'll be right around 65% in conference play at their
Yeah,
winning
I
percentage.
have Arizona kind of close to you. You have them fourth. I have Arizona finishing third in this conference. I'm not going to go for the crazy take that they're going to win the conference. I'm not that confident in it, but I think the value's there from a betting perspective. But I also think if everything goes right for this team, a lot needs to go right. Like I said, they need their young guards to play well. They need to figure out a stable center for their front court. But I really think Arizona is a live dog to win this conference outright in the regular season. I think Arizona is at their best can be as talented as those top teams. I personally have Kansas and Houston as my top two teams in the conference, but this conference very hard as we know with Iowa State as well towards the top. It's just
Hmm.
I said this before Arizona even joined that last year the Big 12 was the best conference, the most competitive conference. I said to you before we started recording, it seems like any night during the season when you get into the middle of that conference play, anyone can win, anyone can upset anybody. I really think it's going to be great for Arizona. You gave your prediction how they finish in the Big 12 first. I'll give my my prediction for how many wins they'll have, and I'll give my prediction for how far I think they'll go in the March Madness tournament. I think they're going to win 26 games this year. They during the Tommy Lloyd era, he's shown an ability to continue to win a lot of games. During the first 3 years, won 33, 28, 27. So I kind of have it on that theme of going down by one or a couple each year. But I wouldn't be shocked if
Hmm.
Arizona only won a little over 20 this year because of the hard competition, as we've said. But I still think they're going to get over 25 wins. I think they're going to get a top four seed in March Madness. And I think Arizona is going to take it a step further this year when it matters. I think Arizona is going to go to the Elite Eight at least this season in March Madness. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that overall, I think I got them a little bit under that. I've got them finishing at 23-9 by the end of the regular season before the conference tournament, of course. 13-7 in conference play. Yeah, I've got them finishing at fourth. I've got Kansas finishing first. in conference, Baylor at second, Iowa State at third, Arizona, and then I'll go on under Texas Tech finishing right after Arizona. And I think they'll be a top four. I think they'll probably be a three seed. I think that's kind of how I see them going into NCAA tournament play. And I don't think their ceiling is necessarily an Elite Eight. I still think having a dynamic scorer like Caleb Love, I think he catches fire at the right time. That's kind of all you need in March Madness, it seems sometimes, is just solid defense and one guy that can't miss. And so I think having Caleb Love on this team definitely keeps them at a very high ceiling. I think they'll end up right in the same area. I think they'll
Yeah.
probably end up Elite Eight. I think that's I think that's probably the safe bet
Hmm.
that I'm at, especially last year. Me and you were huge on the team last year, and they're gonna go to the
Yeah.
Final Four and thought they could win it
Yeah.
all, and especially just going into a new conference and just how competitive it is. Like the rosters, the atmospheres of the other universities, the coaching in this conference is insane. It's insane. And I think that's just one thing that Arizona I think they'll get caught a few times. I think they'll have a few stretches where they'll lose a few games. And
100%.
I and I hope people in Arizona don't start burning down places down Fourth Ave because of it, because of how dominant the Tommy Lloyd era has been with the Pac-12. But this is just an entirely new beast, an entirely new
Yeah,
beast.
it
And
is.
so I see them struggling at times, but I still see them getting some pretty big quality wins, and everything goes right. You start playing your best ball at the end of the year, you can go as far as your stars will take you.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned Caleb Love in the postseason in March Madness, and Arizona obviously added another guy who made a name for himself in March last year in Trey
Mhm.
Townsend. So he has that experience. Another thing, so we got through our predictions here. We both kind of around that, you're at 23, I'm at 26 wins. We both think they're going to be a top four seed, both Elite Eight-ish. So our predictions are very similar there. But before we go today, Jordan, I wanted to close on one thing, and that's the state of the Tommy Lloyd era. He's entering his fourth season as Arizona head coach. And his first three seasons, although, like I said, 33, 28, 27 wins, there's been a lot of disappointment when it comes March every single year. Every year that he's been here, there's been high hopes. Can this be the year Arizona wins or a title or goes to a championship? And every year, the fans and everyone involved has been let down in March. 2 years ago, it was in the first round of Princeton. Last year's against Clemson. So, what's your feeling on Tommy Lloyd as head coach of this program? Are you still confident that Tommy Lloyd can't just lead a good program, but can get Arizona back to the promised land?
I do. I do. I don't think he's anywhere even remotely close to a hot seat. I think even if this year ended with a crazy tournament loss like in the first round, I don't think he's anywhere close to the hot seat. And I think a big thing that points to that, I think, is just looking at you even compare like Arizona football and the state of that of I think the higher ups understand that winning is a privilege. It's not automatic. And I think once you get stagnant with winning over 20 games a year and you're like, well, we're still not putting up championships. I think that can be hard, especially with
Hmm.
fandom and fandom wanting more, which they should. This team has seen the promised land. They're still, I think, on, was it like 27, 28 years since the last title. They've had
97.
they've had a few Final Fours in this century so far. I think that's still the Mecca. That's still where you want to be. But I don't think we're anywhere really close to put the brakes and question Tommy Lloyd, especially this early, because again, like this is his first head coaching job. I still think he is still learning the ropes as it is, and the
Hmm.
state of college athletics is changing year in and year out. we're going to get to revenue sharing, and that's going to open up a whole new can of worms with what that means for the college landscape with athletes and
Mhm.
universities. And so I I I don't see any reason to really jump at the gun and to question whether Tommy is the guy
Yeah,
for
I'm
the
not.
future.
Also clarifying, I'm not saying that he's anywhere near a hot seat.
Yeah, I'm
That's not
not.
my
Yeah.
point. Yeah, so we both agree on that. I'm just saying when you take a step back and look at obviously it's great to get there. It's great to win 25, 28, 30 plus games every single year like he has done. And it's very hard to do that. It's very hard to win conference titles like he's done. But when you have that type of success, it warrants more success and it warrants higher expectations. That's all. And as the years continue to go on, you continue to it continues to warrant more. And you got it. The more higher the expectations are, the more you got to deliver. And up until this point, he hasn't delivered a lot when it matters the most. But Jordan, I think we covered a lot today. Thanks for joining me on the first episode of Bear Down Ballers for our second season together. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for watching, viewing, liking, and subscribing. Follow us on X at BearDownAZPod. Follow the Field of 68 on X as well. And we'll see you after Arizona plays their first